All right, ladies and gentlemen, the From the Flight Deck podcast, and we're presented by Dial-A-Pilot. Of course, you know myself and Joey here, but today we are graced with the presence of Amy Nava, who is a licensed therapist, and she's here in Roseville, California.
Yes.
And Amy and I have known each other for a couple months now, maybe even a couple years at this point.
Possibly, yeah.
But when I first started Dial-A-Pilot, you jumped on and said, hey, this is really cool. You wanted to get
Yes.
involved. And so it led to this conversation that I said, we got to record this. That was the coolest thing I've ever heard. So that's kind of the goal of today, is to talk about where Amy and I kind of got our start as far as a friendship goes, and then using her expertise to talk about the fear of flying, and more so from a mental health side than from a pilot side. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So Amy, thanks for being here.
Yes, absolutely. No, I remember the first time I saw, I think on Instagram originally, the Dial-A-Pilot vision that you had. And I think I messaged you. I said, this is so needed, so amazing. Excuse me. So I'm so happy to be here.
Perfect. Yeah, no, we're really happy to have you here.
Thank you.
I remember the first time we had the conversation was so
Yes.
cool. I was actually driving in Lake Tahoe.
Really?
And yeah,
Oh,
and you called and said, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking about this, and this
Yes.
is why this is going to work. And it was one of those moments that, you know, when you first start a service, you kind of go through this process of like, I have no idea if this is going to work or not. I don't know if people want this. And your conversation with me was what really caused me to kind of accelerate and push on the gas pedal as to what we were trying to do. So
Yes.
first of all, I guess our question is, are you afraid of flying?
Yes. So that's a great question. And I would say in flight anxiety, there's a few different categories we want to consider, because there's a lot that goes into the flying experience. It's not just when you're on the plane, though that's a part of it too. There are things going on externally, the plane itself, feeling like you're weightless, or that gravity kind of feeling of having your body kind of change, and with all that experience. Then there's the internal, excuse me, where you're kind of going through the anxiety and just feeling that in your body. But then there's also everything that leads up to the flight itself. And that's where I would say I definitely get a rise in anxiety, because you think about, okay, did I pack everything? Did I do everything right? Did I get there on time? You have a lot of people around you. So that's actually a category of flight phobia or flight anxiety as well that sometimes gets forgotten. And that's what I would say. Yeah, I definitely feel that.
Interesting. Okay, so yours is more of kind of the logistical, like leading
Yes.
up to
Yes.
packing. A funny story aside from that is I actually, when I flew to Croatia with my now wife, I had her engagement ring with us, and I was so nervous about where it was
Oh my gosh.
that I left my passport on the airplane.
Exactly.
So-
That's exactly it. So there's all these little pieces along the way.
100%.
And so that feeds into it as well.
Right. And so it's kind of a funny story. I'll finish it very briefly, but
Yes.
we're sitting there at the Amsterdam airport, and the folks that we were with knew what was going on. And so I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I hear, Kyle Kokal, please come to the Lost and
Oh
Found.
my gosh.
And I sat there and I was like, I know I have the ring with me. And immediately I'm like, I left my passport on a Boeing 777 from KLM at the Amsterdam airport, which was, they found it somehow.
That's amazing. They found
So,
it.
yeah.
And someone turned it in. Oh,
Right.
that's great.
Which is funny because normally, passport back at the same thing every time. I think that's kind of my way of dealing with that
Yes.
and making sure that I have all the documents that I need and blah, blah, blah. And as Joey can attest to, as pilots, we have to have a medical with us, both of our licenses. We have to have extra forms of ID, passports, all that stuff. So it's always kind of that very logistical, you're doing everything in a very logistical
Yes.
manner.
There's a lot to remember and to
Right.
keep track of. And then
Right.
there's the pressure of when you're waiting in line, people are waiting on you. So they want you to go fast. You take your shoes off, just all of it. It feels kind of like the tension is rising.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I think it's funny when we actually go through security every once in a while, the pilots will go through regular security and we jump the line typically. And I always tell people, I'm
Yes.
like, hey, I'm really good at this. Don't worry, I'll be fast. And the truth of the matter is, since we don't go through it that often, I'm
That's-
actually kind of slow at it. So
Yep.
yeah, it's all about, I guess, looking the part.
Yeah.
But anyways, okay. So we talked a little bit about the beginning of the fear of flying.
Mhm.
And now let's talk about actually on the airplane, and kind of
Yes.
what Dial-A-Pilot does is really provide that pilot to passenger connection. And what I've understood it to be, and again, this came from our conversation, is, okay, I know that that flying is safe. And again, I'm speaking from a passenger standpoint, of course. I know that flying is safe theoretically, and what we find is our clients believe that it's an irrational fear. And I always kind of tell them, I don't think it's irrational.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting on a metal tube at 40,000
Yes.
feet, going 500 miles an hour with two people in charge you've never met.
Yes.
That's scary.
Absolutely.
So what we try to do is provide context and understanding behind why the numbers are what
Yes.
they are and how we've become so safe. So from a mental health standpoint, why is that beneficial in the way that the brain works?
Yes, great question. So first, if we think about our body, and just like I was saying a minute ago, that sensation of just being in a plane. Sometimes with altitude, there's breathlessness, your heart races a little bit, you have like the mechanical vibrations. All of that is literally going to kind of cue your nervous system to say, oh, are we in danger? Is there something going on here? And in that moment, you can, if you're lucky, you can call upon some facts, right? Maybe you looked them up online, you read them, and you think, okay, this is safe, all the things we say to ourselves. But if you add in that moment a relationship and a brief moment you can call upon where you go, I actually talked to a pilot. And maybe you then use that visual of you go, okay, the pilot I talked to is literally up there right now, or some semblance of that, flying this plane. They have families, they have friends. They assured me with the same facts, but with a relationship, with a connection, with a personal side. It's much easier to believe that all of those sensations in the body, the breathlessness, all this, really are normal, really are okay. And then you use those facts to kind of guide a new narrative that's so important. And so when Dial a Pilot, was inspired here, I thought, oh wow, this isn't just facts, because we can all access facts. We have little devices in our pockets all the time. Our phone can Google everything. But if you have a connection and you go, I actually talked to someone and experienced the facts with a connection, you are in a whole new ballpark.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, and we talked about the first time we chatted about this, the confirmation bias piece of this. And I found that so fascinating because the confirmation bias is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to try and paraphrase here.
Good.
Essentially looking for information that proves to our mind that what we believe is actually happening.
Correct.
So pilots actually train for this. And we go into the flight simulator. Joey and I actually recorded a podcast about this as well. And we actually go in and we train how to avoid the confirmation bias and how to avoid groupthink. Because you can sit there and look at a problem and go, oh, that's a fuel leak. And all of a sudden you go down this whole procedure and you shut down an engine when really it wasn't a fuel leak at all.
Yes.
So pilots train for that. And so as soon as you brought that up, all of a sudden it was another aha moment. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. So what we're trying to do is, I guess, allow people to interrupt that confirmation bias, right?
Yes. And then potentially create a new bias or a new narrative that is less fear-based and is actually more fact-based as well. And so you're absolutely right. That's confirmation bias. And with anxiety in particular, it's very tricky in the mind because it tends to look for things, confirmation bias, that prove the level of your anxiety was correct. So you feel the anxiety and then you're looking all around, consciously or subconsciously, for things that will assure your mind, almost give you an ego boost. Yeah, see, you were right. You should have been this afraid. But the problem is we often overestimate what the experience will be like, or overestimate how threatening the experience actually is. So this is in part why, sometimes we've all been there ourselves, or a friend is very anxious about something, and leading up to the experience, they're just jittery and they just say, I don't know how I'm going to do this. This is so scary. Then they get through the experience, whatever it is, flight, anything. And then you say, hey, how'd it go? And they say, hey, it wasn't so bad, actually. It was scary, but I did it. This is usually because we're over appraising the initial anxiety experience. And when we actually get through it, especially with facts, we realize, hey, maybe our brain took us on a little detour we didn't have to go on.
Interesting. So I guess when that happens, let's say, you go into the flight, you expect to feel really nervous, you get through the flight, and you say, oh, you know what, it was better than I thought. Does that, this rings true for me when I go to the dentist. I hate going to the dentist.
Yes.
Now, does that scientifically, the next time you go get on an airplane, is it going to make it even easier for them to get on, or does the same thing happen?
It could make it easier, but the piece that is missing a lot of times is real reflection or awareness of that piece where you go, oh, it actually went better than I thought. Because a lot of times we'll have that little notification in our mind, if you think of it like that, that says, oh, it was better than we thought, but we blow right past it because we've had years of training our brain to go the other direction, which is over appraise, over detect threat just to make you safe. And that's actually a survival wiring. And that's been in our brain for so long. So to completely unwire that idea that our brain is always looking out for danger to keep us safe, it's a big task. It's possible, and we can soften that edge quite a bit through creating new narratives. But we have to give time to reflect on and really notice, oh, it went better than I thought. Not just a fleeting thought, but it went better, but an actual experience where you're reflecting, talking to a pilot, right? Talking to friends. It actually did go better. That creates a new narrative.
Interesting. Okay. So it's a very intentional, kind of mindful thing.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
To be able to go in and then kind of create those building blocks and almost go
Yes.
through with what sounds to me kind of like a training regimen.
It is, because we are literally training our brain, which is, again, a huge task, very important task, if not the most important. But it's training our brain to actually work for us, not against us, and to have other possibilities exist, especially with our high anxiety areas.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So one of the questions that Joey and I talked about earlier was a lot of the folks that come to us, and I would say it's probably as high as 90%. They actually will come to us and say, hey, I never had a fear of flying when I was little, which is funny because I did.
Oh,
And,
really?
and Joey actually did as well.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Okay.
And so only on airliners for some reason. I flew on all the small airplanes and had no problems. I loved it. But on airliners, I would get really nervous when I was little. But let's say now somebody's 30, 35 years old and they've started to realize, oh, I'm really anxious on flights. Joey's got a theory on why that is, but we want to know from a true, again, mental health professional, what's going on there when somebody starts to gain that kind of level of anxiety that they maybe didn't have before, and then they kind of try and fight it off and explain it away. This was never a problem before. What's going on?
That's interesting. Well, it could be a lot of different factors, really, but what comes to my mind first is thinking about what are the other experiences in that person's life leading into the narrative of bad things happen. And we have a lot of data that could suggest we have constant input around scary things, bad things, threatening things. We see it everywhere we are throughout our day. Look out, look out, look out. And this isn't always a conscious awareness of, oh, I have threat around me all day, but it's a subconscious awareness. So the older we get, the more we see the real world, so to speak, the more we see bad things happening. And so because of that, again, it's building that narrative of something bad is bound to happen to me. So therefore, it's just a matter of time or something in that nature.
Gotcha.
It's harder to go through life because life is hard. It's harder to go through life with that more positive, safe outlook. If you grew up, in a healthy home, and if we all had that, that'd be wonderful. But typically there's a little bit more sense of safety as a kid if we have a good childhood. So as you get older, it's just harder to kind of swim upstream.
I see. Okay, gotcha. So yeah, it's interesting. Joey also very aptly pointed out that as you get older and older, you kind of can make that you can make the connection between that sense of danger that's out there. And again, not to say that flying is dangerous. It's actually statistically, it's the safest form of transportation.
Yes.
But you see all these accidents of years past.
Right.
Maybe you don't understand them entirely, or obviously everybody's busy, and so sitting there and going and studying an aviation accident is maybe not necessarily the thing you want to do.
No, and actually on that, when we're talking about anxiety or any distressing kind of situation, mental imagery is huge. And we are really seeing a skyrocket research kind of focus because of social media, actually. So because we're getting more visual imagery available to us all the time, TikTok, everything, we're seeing things that will stick with us. So if you see something scary in any category of life, that impact on the brain and how you're going to then interpret that scary thing if you do it is enormous. So that mental imagery is kind of shooting us in the foot a little bit.
Interesting. So that goes in and that kind of builds that confirmation bias in a negative way. Yeah.
It says, remember when you saw that thing on or that video and it was scary and people were scared? Again, the relational component. If you're watching a video, not just of a scary thing happening, but of people being scared of the scary thing, it completely imprints on us.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we start to get a very empathetic response, right? You're watching a scary movie,
Right.
a person's scared on the screen, so you feel scared. So if you're matching that empathetic or relational part of bonding with something scary, ooh, just like what you're doing, opposite, you're matching empathy and relationship with fact. That's strengthening. That's good. But if you do it the opposite way, it has power on the dark side too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And unfortunately, that's kind of the nature of what I would view social media as being is, it's a very engaging platform. Kind of striking that fear can be something that people really engage with. Again,
It's hard to look away.
it is.
Yeah.
It is hard to look away. And it's funny, we talk to a lot of clients that say, "Oh, I watched 14 episodes of Air Crash Investigations the day before my flight."
Oh gosh.
And what's funny is when I was like 10 years old, we were going to Hawaii as a family, and I did the same thing.
Yeah.
But for me, and again, I think this is an aviation interest thing, and Joey can probably relate to this as well. For me, it was interesting because I had the context behind it. I knew what, the ailerons on the airplane were. I knew what the engines were. I knew how the airplanes were designed. And, maybe I didn't know it that well when I was 10, but it almost served the opposite way where I was kind of able to see, aviation safety. That's kind of what we're trying to do is to give that, that antithesis to the scary stuff that comes out. And when we first got started in late June of this year, there was a viral video of an accident that happened off of the California coast, and that caused our social media to like really blow up because it sent a lot of people to us, and we didn't post it.
Yeah.
And I'm very, I feel very strongly about not posting anything like that and fear mongering because that's obviously not what the service is for.
No.
But it is really fascinating that we jump on those calls and get a lot of those questions. Hey, I saw this. What actually happened?
Right. It's very hard to forget once you see something.
Definitely. Definitely. So again, Joey, anything coming up for you? I know we've kind of kept it going quite a bit over here.
Yeah, no problem. And for the listeners, sorry, I live in Minnesota and they're obviously in California. So I would have loved to have joined and met you in person, Amy, but I really appreciate your time. But to bring it back, because this has been something that has been extremely fascinating to me over doing these calls now for 3 months and talking to a lot of people. I was telling Kyle, and I'll tell you, without fail, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. Kyle asked a question already, but without fail, the people that we talk to, it all develops later in life. And in my theory that he was mentioning is, and this is because I asked him, a couple more questions. They say I was never afraid until they got later in life and they had been flying and they had flown, no problems. They even got into their early adult lives, no problems. And then usually I'll ask, like, what do you think changed? And usually it's they had children, or they have a new house, or they have a vacation in 2 years that they're looking forward to. So it's more like almost love. Like you start to love things, and then you start playing that doomsday scenario. How is this in the case of children? How are they going to be without me? And then they start going down that rabbit hole. So I think it has to do with you start to care about more things. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that seems to be the common consensus, is they just have more things that they care about. And as a kid, I think you're just willy-nilly flying around the world and you don't really think that way. So I don't know. Have you seen that, or do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, sort of this threat detection, we're going to be more afraid of anything or any scenario when we have more to lose. And this is kind of the classic love story, right? It's all these songs that sing about it, and all of this idea that once we are bonded with something or someone or some kind of life we've created, then we actually increase this risk of losing it. And so when you're a kid, you have maybe good things going on in your life, hopefully, but there isn't so much that you have personally invested and built and really worked for too, which then goes into this whole dopamine experience of when you've worked for something and then you achieve it, even in the context of a solid relationship or buying a home or having kids or working for a job you like or anything like this, having pets, right? Another huge one. That is just going to be a huge dopamine, serotonin experience, and then you don't want to lose that. So again, the threat detection radar that we all have in our mind is going to really get activated when we have things that are very important to us. So the world gets scarier as we get older, in part because we're aware of scary things happening, but also, Joey, like you said, in part because we have more to lose.
We've talked a little bit about, being able to accept that, okay, I'm afraid of flying, and now there's a way that I can move past this. And so when the people are actually on the airplane, let's say, our service aside, they actually get on the airplane. You told me some tips and techniques that you would recommend
Yes.
previously, and they're amazing. I actually started using them in my own life as far
Good.
as the looking different directions and activating
Yes.
different sides of the brain. So I would love to get into a little bit more about that and kind of how
Good.
that works.
Yes. We'd kind of want to think about a few different areas of therapy modalities, or we could call that therapy styles, because in the therapy world, actually, a lot of people don't realize there's a whole lot of categories of how a therapist or a psychologist or anyone in the world there would approach a struggle. And so there's all different styles. Kind of think of it as like brands of cars. They all get you from point A to point B, hopefully, but there's Toyotas, there's Hondas, and everyone has their different camps of what they like, right? So there's some different like brands of cars here, different therapy modalities. But the first one that's very helpful with anxiety and phobias is cognitive behavioral therapy. This is a really common one. A lot of people know this. We call it CBT. And that is the idea of shifting your thoughts, and then that changes how your body might experience something and have more calm and more peace. So this is starting with like facts, and this is a lot of what Dial-A-Pilot does, is it's doing CBT in a way where you're assuring people with facts that it's going to be okay. You're creating some new narratives, and then once the thoughts change, or if they can start to get softened, then the body will kind of follow along with it. So this is what we actually call top-down therapy. So you kind of start with the top, with the mind, and then the body follows. So that's really helpful. Facts, changing the narrative with truth, awareness of what you're saying automatically to yourself. A lot of times we don't realize we're saying kind of scary, nasty things as we're going through something hard, like, oh, look at, there's something bad. So catching those and then replacing them with things that are actually true and useful, often that Dial-A-Pilot, the phone call, would provide. So that's cognitive behavioral therapy. The other category, though, is sort of what we'd call experiential or somatic. And this is the idea of bottom up is actually what we call it. So that means you start with the body, with regulating the body, and then the mind says, oh, the body's calm, so maybe the mind can take a breath too and just sort of relax. So in the bottom up mentality, this is kind of incorporating breath work, of course, a lot of different other little tricks that you can do. But the one that we had talked about was actually eye position. And this is in the category of brain spotting, or EMDR, which is kind of a whole thing in and of itself. So that's something to explore for those that are really interested. But in a nutshell, we can utilize components of this by thinking about the eye position and how it activates different parts of the brain. So because the occipital lobe is in the back, low back of the head and the brain, what that means is when you look, let's say, to the left, to activate that vision, even if people that are blind, by the way, just moving your eyes and activating those muscles sends a whole little like fire path all the way to the back of your brain and activates a whole lot of things in the brain. And this is good because when we are looking one way, it actually tends to lean more heavily on emotion or on logic. So the brain is divided into left and right hemisphere. The left side of our brain is more focused on logic. The right side is a little bit more focused on emotion. So it's opposite, so it gets a little bit tricky, but when you look to the left, you're activating the right side of your brain. So if you even try right now, you would look to the left, and that's going to activate the right side of your brain. So if you're needing to pull down some logic, clear thought, decrease anxiety, it would be a really good idea to look to the left, and you can look up, mid, or down to the left. Compared to if you're actually a little bit too robotic, or if you're having kind of a hard time connecting to your emotion, probably not when you're on a plane, but in any other thing in your life, you'd want to look to the right, and that will actually activate a little bit more emotional awareness. Now, I will say sometimes it's flipped. Sometimes not your actual brain, but just your experience. Sometimes is in other areas of your vision field. So you play with it yourself, but then you kind of get to know, oh, when I look in this spot, I feel calmer. When I look in that spot, I feel less calm. And then you can use that.
It's so interesting. It's like the third time you and I have talked about this, and I find it so fascinating every time.
Yes.
And I actually catch myself in the providing of this service, especially as I'm trying to figure out kind of the next moves and what we're doing and the hiring of pilots. I find myself kind of going to this one specific spot of my vision
Really?
that actually traps me.
Interesting.
And I find that I'll be looking there and I'm trying to think about something, and I'm not getting anywhere for 10, 15 minutes at a time, but it
Yes.
feels like I am. And I'll recall our conversation. And I'm like, wait,
Yes.
okay, hang on. Amy said this. And then I'll move my
Yes.
gaze somewhere else. And all of a sudden it kind of unlocks and it gets
Cool.
the ice to start moving,
Good.
which is amazing. It's really
Yes.
fascinating to experience it.
Yeah, so and I'll mention brain spotting and EMDR are actually trauma modalities. So they are actually in the category of working through trauma. And trauma can be all kinds of things. We have like our capital T trauma, kind of as I call it, like the big kind of classic traumas. But then we have a lot of lowercase t traumas. And those are the things that often go undetected. Being bullied at school, moving when you were a kid, all kinds of stuff. And they can happen throughout your whole life, right? And so if someone was actually doing like brain spotting or EMDR for a specific session and doing trauma work, we would actually be exploring all kinds of horizontal and then vertical vision fields for you. And we'd actually, I brought it right here, but we'd use this little pointer, and some of my other ones have cool stuff on the end. This one is just plain. But we'd literally be going through your vision, and I'd be looking for cues in your body, because we tend to do things when we're on a spot that has some tension. We swallow, we blink, we have a breath. And so we'd be going through, and I'd be finding, and I'd be literally plotting out all the different spots where I would say, I don't know what that is, but there's something there in your brain. And that's so cool when the body just, body keeps a score. It's a very popular book about trauma.
yeah.
And I love that phrase because it's true. The body keeps a score. So it will tell us things that we need to pay attention to.
That is so wild.
Yes.
So how long have you done, you're an EMDR therapist?
I do brain spotting,
Brain
which is
spotting.
kind of like a category of EMDR that is actually more relational. So EMDR is excellent as well, but it's a little bit more like formal in kind of how the client might experience it.
Okay.
Brain spotting is a little bit more attachment as well as science.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you for telling us about that. So how can folks, when they're actually on an airplane, let's say they get on the airplane, they're on their way and they start to, they get into a little bit of turbulence or maybe
Yes.
even a lot of turbulence.
Right.
And, the flight attendants are now seated. That causes a lot of anxiety for people, we found. And so we always tell them, if you haven't been on a call with us, we always say, that's out of an abundance of caution. And really what we're doing in the turbulence from a pilot's perspective is we look at everything from the airplane is going to be structurally fine. These things are tested to these unbelievable limits. In fact, I put a video up yesterday of the Airbus 350 being tested, and they bent the wing 17 feet in displacement,
Wow.
which is just amazing.
My gosh.
So the airplane's going to be structurally fine. But, from a passenger standpoint, once we get into the chop or the turbulence, the seatbelt sign comes back on. We make an announcement about it. And really what we don't want happening, Amy, is you walking down the aisle and you lose your footing and you fall over and you bonk heads with, Dan sitting on the aisle.
Right.
And that's a problem. So we make sure that, that's kind of what we're doing. And then if the turbulence gets a little bit further, we don't want the flight attendants falling down, breaking a
Right.
collarbone, spilling hot coffee on someone. So again, abundance of caution. And so that's what we're doing. But that causes people
Yes.
a lot of anxiety, especially if the pilots don't make a lot of an announcement about it, because then they can't relate and what's going on. Why is this happening?
Exactly.
How can somebody interrupt that cycle
Yes.
when they're on the airplane?
Good. So again, it would be, I always like to tell my clients, and I think through this myself too when I'm anxious, go top down and bottom up. So play with both of those, but at least try them, because you just got to see what responds in that moment for yourself. So I like to start with top down. Again, that means starting with the mind and then seeing if the body will follow where you're taking your mind. So top down is going to be thinking about what are your automatic thoughts. And that's a perfect example. You see or even hear both the seatbelt sign go on and that sound even ding, right? It can have all kinds of sensory reactions because you might have associated scary narratives all around that in your mind. So when that goes on, become aware of what your automatic thoughts are. So if you're thinking, kind of like you were alluding to, oh gosh, the seatbelt sign came on, the stewardesses are sitting down, this is bad, is usually kind of the direction our thoughts are going to go. So you'd first want to catch that automatic thought and go, wait a second, this is not necessarily bad. And again, to consider, I'm likely over appraising how bad it is, because that's how our minds are wired. So to start with that, you'd want to snag those automatic thoughts, and if you can, try to give them less power. So you'd notice that they might not be true, and then it would be a great time to utilize things that you learned from your phone call with Dial-A-Pilot, or things that you can kind of say or remind yourself that are true in the different narrative, in the better narrative. Like, it's an abundance of caution. Like, this is all going to be okay, most likely, but it is scary for me right now. You know, things like that. So you're going to want to replace your thoughts. And to do that, you're going to want to catch the automatic ones and then give it something better, your brain something better to feast on. That's top down. Then bottom up would be body first, breath work, maybe some eye position, some even activating like your vocal cords is really good at calming down the whole body. So humming a little bit, talking. This is partly, I think, why people are very chatty on the airplane. I think it's sometimes out of nerves. We talk more when we're nervous. Well, isn't that cool if biologically we're instinctually just activating our vocal cords and that calms us down? Polyvagal, it activates this whole thing in our body. So that would be bottom up. Sensory stuff is going to also be good. So I say try both, top down, and then you go bottom up.
Interesting. Yeah, there. You said something in there that had me fascinated. So you capture your thoughts, you're able to kind of put them aside or recognize that, hey, okay, that's where my mind automatically goes. And now I can recognize that this is an abundance of caution approach.
Yes.
We're going to get through this in a few minutes. And, you know, what you would hear on one of our calls is what the pilots are actually doing during that time. You may hear the engine spool up. That's us climbing to a new altitude to try and find a better ride, which just is, you know, which is jargon for less turbulence.
Yes.
So, or the engine spool down, same thing. That's what we're doing the whole time. We're looking at all of our different iPad apps that tell us where turbulence is. We have some amazing tools. Now, so you now know that that's going on, and then you go to the breath work and or the eye spotting or any one of those things. You actually mentioned too, like taking a sour candy.
Yes, thank you. I forgot that one. So that's an excellent one because anything sour, we could really say anything that's an intense sensory experience, but sour candy is so easy and also fairly enjoyable. A lot of people like it. It kind of resets your brain a little bit because it has to draw all of that attention to the sensation because it's a little bit shocking, but not harmful. Shocking, but not scary, right? All this kind of idea. So when we have things that are alerting but not scary, so woo, that's really sour, that is going to really help our brain kind of reset and just focus on that thing. That's really good for especially those that have maybe panicky feelings or panic attacks. Of course, it's not a cure-all. There's a lot of other components to that, but I always tell my clients that have panic, you even get the little airhead spray. This was really common online a while ago, and I love it because it's very sour. So you just spray it right there. You can have it anywhere you need it.
Interesting. Yeah. There you go. A little grab and go sour spray. You might want to bring a Listerine strip too if you remember those from sixth grade because it'll make it a little ugly afterwards.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, that's awesome. So, okay, and then how can people figure out? You know, for some they say, "Oh, breath work really works for me," or it doesn't work. Is this just really kind of going through each modality and kind of, again, as we alluded to earlier, training yourself on breath work works for me or it doesn't work for me? You know, brain spotting or using my eyes to find a more calming place works for me or it doesn't work for me. Is it just the same type of thing? You just kind of have to know what works best for you?
You do have to know what works for you. But I will also say on breath work in particular, I see this all the time, and I think we can all relate to it. People say, you just need to breathe more, right? And then we kind of laugh and we go, yeah, thanks. Like, that's obvious, right? And maybe then they say, oh, yeah, I breathe all the time. And I always say this to my clients. I say, okay, can you show me what you mean? Show me how you normally breathe when you're anxious. And this is what I see. Look at my shoulders. They go like this. And I always laugh and I stop them and I say, okay, your lungs are not up here. Your lungs are actually right in here, and you want to get your diaphragm to be moving. So a lot of times with breath, we tend to discredit it and we think, well, I breathe all day. Breathing, when people say just take a deep breath, they mean one breath in your shoulders. That's not what we actually mean. We mean breathing in a habit, breathing in kind of a really good practice in your diaphragm. And there's a lot of great ways you can do this. There's square breathing. There's intermittent nostril breathing. There's all kinds of things that we talk about more in depth later. But this idea of really actually giving it a run for its money. Don't just do it for a second and think I tried it and it didn't work. Breath is actually our best way to communicate to our nervous system, but we tend to go very fast through it, and then we think it doesn't work. Usually it actually does, but we got to slow down and do it actually the right biological way.
Interesting. Okay, so we got to have a lot of maturity to be able to get through the breath work stuff is what I'm hearing.
And patience, because we like things fast. We like things right away. The problem is the body is not fast.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. So one of the other things I want to point out here is if you're listening to this and you're hearing all these great tips and you're thinking, wow, I really got to remember these on all of my future flights. When I first had this conversation with Amy, I thought the exact same thing. How am I going to remember all this stuff? And then I said, hey, do you want to write a little ebook together? And we decided to do it. And Amy, I think this just speaks to who you are as a person. I said, hey, when do you think you could have it done? And I said, maybe 2 weeks or so. Do you think that's enough time? And you said, yeah, I could probably have it in 2 weeks. And not 6 hours later, I had it in my email. And you said, hey, I finished it. And it was 20 some odd pages of really, really good stuff and interactive and, gets you to actually have to stop and do things. And it's a very conversational read. I really, really like the way that you did it.
Good.
And so that first 20 pages is essentially from Joey and I, and viewing everything from a pilot's perspective. When you're actually looking out at the wing, why are the flaps moving, and what are the flaps? And essentially, to answer that question, because I try not to use jargon, it changes the shape of the wing to create more lift. And so that's what we use during takeoff and landing.
Wow.
Well, we talk about that in the book, and then we say, there's all these signs on the airport that don't mean anything to somebody that doesn't know what they mean, but they mean everything to the pilots. And so we actually say, hey, if you want to look outside the window and kind of join and figure out where we're at, here's what all those signs mean. And you can, just
love that.
something fun.
Yes.
It's a little aviation nerd thing,
that's so
which,
cool.
yeah, Joey and I, of course, love.
Yeah, I do too.
But I think, moving past that, we talk about some of those things to give people the context behind what's actually happening. But if you are still having trouble with getting through those thoughts, even with, having talked to a pilot and knowing what's going on, your side of that book, that 20 some odd pages that you wrote, I think is just an amazing, amazing resource. So between that and bringing your Sudoku or whatever it is, having a good, watching Happy Gilmore on the plane,
yes.
I think we can really help folks kind of move through that fear in a positive manner, not let it take over their lives.
Yes.
And stop them from traveling, because we see that from a lot of folks that haven't traveled in 10, 15 years.
Well, and in part that book was so easy to write because, well, one, I'm walking a lot of clients through anxiety in general and just all of these things. So to me, I go, oh, awesome. Just, right there it goes. But also, when we look at some of the statistics, like up to 40% of people have flight anxiety, which is so remarkable to me. When I read that and I was really learning that long ago, I was like, wow. So when you're on a plane, you think about that's like about half of that plane. So you could literally just look at all the people right next to you and go, okay, that whole side is feeling some level of anxiety. Of course, it changes in severity, but still, just to know you're not alone. These are really common fears and just things that are coming up. And so this is what I do, all day, every day, anxiety in general or depression in general, all these things that go together. So there are things out there that really can help. Takes time, takes patience. We don't have a lot of that on hand. So we got to really make sure we know it's going to be patience, but there are lots of solutions.
Right, which is just awesome. It's funny you say draw a line down the middle of the airplane essentially, and half of the people on, or all of the people on one side of the airplane are going to be nervous. We were on a flight to Denver the other day. My wife and I, we were going out there for a friend's wedding. And as we were approaching the runway, everything was great, super smooth flight, no problems at all. And about 50 feet off the runway, they did what's called a go-around. And a go-around is a really, it's not necessarily a common thing because we don't do them that often, but Joey and I brief them on every single flight. And what it boils down to is if you're, I'd like to use metaphors, somebody use a metaphor here.
Good.
If you're pulling into a parking spot and you don't kind of really like how you're lined up, you back out and you kind of reset and go back at it and do it again.
Yes.
We do the same thing in the airplane. If we're coming in and we're a little too fast, we go around and we just circle the airport and land again. But it's an unnerving thing for people to experience. You're almost down to the ground, everything's pretty quiet, and all of a sudden the engine noise comes back up.
Yeah.
And you see the flaps moving on the wing and the gears coming back up. And so I was sitting there, and I'm just a passenger. I'm sitting on the window seat, and or actually I was sitting on the middle seat. I try to be the good husband.
Yes.
Maddie's going to probably protest that statement, but I try to, as far as sitting in the middle seat.
Yes.
So as soon as that happened, we did the go around, and Maddie looked at me and she said, what's happening?
Exactly.
And I took my headphone off, and the whole airplane was murmuring, hey, what happened?
Yes.
And so all of a sudden, I think even the folks that weren't necessarily afraid of flying were starting to wonder what was going on, because it's unnerving.
Yeah.
It's not normal.
Yes.
And so it was funny. She's sitting there. She's like, you can get up and make an announcement. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. But I just find it really fascinating that when all of a sudden something even a little bit abnormal happens, it really kind of causes this, this kind of shoulders up response that you just alluded to.
It does, yes. And, that is such a big piece of flying, is your lack of control, because you are just sitting in this nice little seat, right? You have your little seatbelt and everything. And in so many ways, you don't have control, even intellectual control, and unless you know what's going on through Dial a Pilot or being a pilot or researching on your own, you don't have intellectual control. You don't have perhaps emotional control because your body is like activated. And maybe, of course, you don't have even the physical control, right? Your body's starting to panic and you can't calm it down, or your body is just feeling that sensation again, which is going to register potential threat. So that feeling of not being in control is it just gets all of us. So
it does.
Even those that don't have flight anxiety, as soon as you remind that brain, oh yeah, you're not in control, usually everyone will get a rise in anxiety, just like in that experience.
Right,
yeah.
right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was definitely fascinating to see. So with all that being said, first of all, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's always such a pleasure to chat with you and learn more. Joey, anything else coming up for you before we give Amy her spotlight on what she likes to do outside of the fear of flying stuff?
Yeah, no, thank you, Amy. You guys probably can't tell, but my jaw's been on the floor for a lot of this. This is the first time I've heard you speak. So a lot of this is so interesting simply because as pilots, we're very fact-based. We don't really like to tap into the emotion side, and we can't really as pilots when we're up there operating. So hearing things from a cognitive side is very fascinating. I think a lot of people are going to be able to use this. But as pilots, again, like I said, we're very fact-based. And so when we're on the calls, we're giving them facts and we're giving them knowledge about what we do every day. We don't really give them cognitive stuff. I mean, save a few little things. So it's been very fascinating. Thank you, Amy. And really, I feel like on this, I've just been sitting here watching, and I've just been like having to hold my jaw because a lot of this is so interesting. So again, thank you. I hope we can do this again and talk more. And obviously, Kyle will wrap it up, and you'll have the last word. But thank you,
Amy. Beyond your kind of helping with us with the fear of flying service,
yes.
which again we're so grateful and thankful for.
Oh, I love it.
You are really big into horses and equine assisted therapy. Am I saying that right?
Well, you're close. You're on it. Equine.
Yeah.
Yep. Equine assisted psychotherapy.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Equine assisted psychotherapy. Yep. So fascinating. And you're also the proud owner of a Clydesdale, which as a non-horse guy, that sounds so cool to me.
Yes. So I have grown up kind of in a lot of nature, a lot of country and horses. And then when I became a licensed marriage and family therapist, I had started to hear kind of rumors kind of coming down the pipeline that, there's this integration of horses and mental health. And I just thought, sign me up. That sounds like everything I do, everything I'm about, because I knew all throughout my personal experience in life that horses are very powerful and how they can help us connect to our emotions and just ground us. And, Joey, like you said, sometimes because of our personality or our career, we're very disconnected from our emotions. And so horses actually really help us get in touch with that. And I knew it because of my personal experience. But then when kind of the rest of the world caught up, I thought, well, yes, please, I will definitely pursue that. So I actually do, I do office sessions with people in my practice where we're doing talk therapy and, all of this. But then I also do the equine assisted psychotherapy. So it's out at the barn. It's usually group based and it's a little bit more somatic. So again, it's that more bottom up as opposed to top down. And there's beautiful things that happen out at the barn, and horses are so intuitive and just they sense heartbeat 4 feet away. They can recognize over 15 different emotions on the human face. Their memory is exceptional. And actually their electromagnetic field is incredibly large. So what that means is when our nervous system gets close to theirs, especially when we touch, we are going to ground to their nervous system. So that's really good news. If our nervous system is being hijacked, we get around a horse, and if that horse is calm, which the ones we use in therapy are, or usually are, then we will feel much calmer. So I hear it all the time. People come out and they say, I was so anxious, and as soon as we got near the horse, it just totally subsides.
That is so wild. That's awesome. Yeah, it's I always think it's so fascinating to hear all about this. And I got a little golden retriever at home, so I go back to the golden retriever in this moment. So I imagine having it weigh 1,000 pounds is even more powerful. But well, thank you, Amy. It's again such a pleasure. I think that this is going to be really helpful for a lot of people.
Good.
And we just can't thank you enough for always taking the time for us
Good.
and really kind of helping us and guiding what we're doing. So
Anytime,
you
as
help
it started.
thousands of people, it seems like to me a day, and I'm sure it'll be in the millions at some point. So thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Well, since the start, you know, it's the same passion where I go, ooh, you guys have something really special here, because it's facts, but also it's the relationship, it's the attachment, it's the connection. And I think that's what people need. So I'm here
Awesome.
for it all day.
Awesome. Well, we
Good.
appreciate it.
Good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.